So grief timeline is influenced by a lot of things and a lot of factors. And so just think through some of what might be affecting your timeline, because understanding them can really help you stop judging yourself or judging others, and can really help you just sort of settle in to your own grief journey. So factor one, um, the particular relationship you had with this particular loved one. And what I mean by that, excuse me, and what I mean by that is if this was your mom that you saw every single day, or that even lived in your house, um, that's going to be very different than your mom who you saw 3 times a year. Doesn't mean one's better or worse, it just means different. Was the relationship complicated? I have found in my work that the more complicated a relationship is, the more complicated the grief is. That doesn't happen all the time, but it tends to happen. If you were a caregiver, if you were the one doing the bulk of the caregiving, that's going to affect the timeline. So consider these for just a moment. How might you describe the relationship with your loved one who died? And how might you anticipate that affecting your timeline? Okay, so factor two is sort of the circumstances of the moment. A sudden loss often creates longer and more complex grief than a loss that goes over a long period of time, and that's kind of expected. A loss that is traumatic, and I'm not going to describe what those are, but I think you can imagine, often bring about PTSD symptoms that extend the timeline and that complicate it a little bit. And I always recommend that if there has been a traumatic death, yes, a client can use me and I will work with them, but I always recommend also having a therapist to do some of that traumatic work together. Okay, factor three, your own support system. Research tends to indicate that people with stronger support systems often, but not always, often move through grief more smoothly. But even with an incredible support system, a support group, grief takes time. So factor four, other life stressors. Isn't this going to be general? So like if your work situation is particularly stressful, if you're going through a merger, if you're starting a business, if it's a particularly hard situation at work, that's going to affect your timeline. Relationship issues, financial problems, health concerns, all of these will affect the grief timeline. Likely make it longer for you, but not always. And I want to share just a brief little story. I had a friend whose mom died, and just 2 years later, she was diagnosed with cancer. And so I would touch base with her from time to time.